Hello there and welcome. In this episode, we're going to start a new system for our RTS game, and this will be the building system or the construction system, whatever you want to call it. This is a very big and important part of any RTS game. We want to be able to construct different buildings, and these buildings will give us different functionality. For example, by creating a certain building, we're going to be able to create certain units. There will be buildings that will give us power. So it really depends on what you're trying to accomplish. We're going to do something very simple, but of course, using this knowledge and using the system, you can create your own variations and create the game that you want to. Because this system is rather complex, I don't want to spend the next 10 episodes writing down the code and creating the scripts just so we can have a working system. I'm going to provide to you the base scripts that you need for the system, and then we're going to polish it and add a few more things so you don't have to spend time on it. So for it, you can find the link in the description for the assets for the 11th episode. I already have it over here, the same way we did with episode 10. So inside, you're going to be able to find a bunch of scripts, some prefabs, and a material. So you simply need to import it. Of course, by now you know how to import packages into your project. And as soon as we get it inside our project, we can simply take this prefab, this building system prefab, and drag it into the scene. Now, another thing that I want to mention is that some of the code inside this building is not my own. I took inspiration from other tutorials, other sources online. I just mixed things together. I added some code of my own to make it work the way I wanted to, but some parts are not my own. So if you recognize it from other tutorials, I'm not claiming this is my own code. Some of it is, but the other part is not mine. So we have the building system, and inside we have different components, and each component will take responsibility for different things inside the system. So for example, we have the input manager, so we can know what the player is doing. We also have the placement system, which is the actual brain behind all of it. We have the grid, so we can know where we want to build our houses or the buildings. And we also have the preview, so this is before we actually place the item. We want some kind of transparent preview of the item that we want to build, so we can know how will it look and where we want to place it before we actually place it. Then we also have another component that will be responsible to actually placing the item on the ground. So there's a lot of components involved, and I'm not going to explain to you all of them, and I'm not going to go over all the scripts because some of them are very long and it's just going to take a lot of time. We're going to understand the main logic behind of this, and later when we're going to add some more features into the system, we're going to go into the scripts and change things a bit, so you're going to get familiarized with it. So because it came inside this asset package that I created, then all the references should already be in place, but let's just make sure. Let's click on the input manager. So we don't have the camera, obviously, because you're going to have another camera in your project. So we simply go into our camera. We are not going to take the camera controller, but the main camera, and we're going to drag it over here. Over here, we need the layer mask for the ground, so the system will know where to build the buildings. So if you don't have the ground layer, just create it over here and create a new ground layer and then set it over here. Then you need to set it on the actual terrain. So we will go over here, terrain, and we're going to make it the ground layer. And this way it will know to only build on the ground. Then we're going to click on the placement system, and all the references should already be here. So we have the reference for the input manager, we have the reference for the grid, we have the reference for the database, we have the reference for the preview system, and we have a reference for the object placer. If you don't find any of these references over here, just drag them one by one, and the grid one should be the zone, so the one that is inside. Now we're going to continue. We're going to click on this grid parent, and it should have nothing on it, but inside we're going to find this grid zone, and it will have a grid component. So this will basically split our terrain into grids, into cells, so we can control the size of the cells, and we can also get the position of the cell when we want to build the item. Because we want to create some kind of cell-based system. Of course, in your game, you can create a more freestyle placement, so you can place items anywhere you want, but usually in RTS games, there is some kind of structure, so items can only be placed one next to the other, so there will be no overlapping, and this is a easier way to do it. Then we have the preview system, which only has this transparent material, and this will basically make our prefabs into transparent models so we can see how they look before we actually place them. Then we also have the object placer, which will have a reference to all the placed objects, so later when we want to delete them or check different things, we can have a reference to them, and of course there's a bit more logic inside of this script. Now the system is mostly done, especially this part. Obviously we're going to add more things, but at this point we're going to be able to already use it. The only thing that we need is a way to actually enable it, and for this we need some UI. So we do have this health bar for the UI and cursors, but we still don't have actual UI, we don't have a GUI, so we don't have something to interact with our game. And for this we're going to do something very simple just for now, just to see that the system is working. Later we're going to actually add a UI with buttons, and we're going to make it, we're going to try to make it look good. So for now we're going to create a new UI, and we're going to have a canvas. We're going to rename it to UI, and over here we're going to change the UI scale mode to be scale with screen size, and we're going to set the reference to be HD, actually like this. Now we're going to add a script that we have over here, and this is the UI manager. So we're simply going to drag it on this canvas. And over here we need two references. So we need a button and we need the placement system. So in order to actually activate the placement system, we need a reference to it. So we're going to drag it over here. And we need a button to actually build something. So inside this UI canvas, we're going to create a button. And it can be a TextMesh Pro, so if you did not import a TextMesh Pro package, it's going to ask you to import it first. But now we have this button, we're going to make it a bit bigger, and we're going to position it somewhere at the bottom. We can see it over here. Actually, let's just... And this is just for now, just for testing. Now that we have this button, we can drag it over here into this reference. So we're going to drag it. And for now, just imagine that this is one of the buttons to create some kind of building, to construct, let's say, a barracks or some kind of a power plant. So we're going to have a bunch of these buttons over here, and we're going to be able to unlock them only if we have money and things like that. But for now, we have this one button. And later, we're simply going to decide that this button is going to build a certain constructible building. So we're going to provide it with an ID. And by providing this ID, we will know which kind of prefab to construct. For now, it's going to be hard-coded. And if we go into our UI manager, we can see that it's a very simple script. It simply has a reference to the button and the placement system. In the start, it's going to add a non-click listener. So when we click on this button, it's going to call this method, this construct method. And all this method is doing is starting this method, this start placement method, from the placement system. And it also passes an ID. For now, we only have this hard-coded ID. So hard-coded ID of 0. Okay, because right now we are only testing things out and we only want to see that it works. So we're providing this hard-coded ID. Later, we're going to have some kind of reference inside of each button. So each button will know its own ID. And then we're simply going to say something like construct button ID or something like that. And it will know what is its ID. So if it's the button for the power plant, it's going to know the ID of the power plant prefab. And if it's another building, it will know its own prefab. But for now, we only have a simple button, so we're going to hard code this ID, and we're going to call this method and start the placement using this ID. Now we can click on Control and click on this method, and it's going to bring us into the placement system. So you can see it's a very complex script. Not very complex, but I'm not going to go over it because there's a lot of things involved. Inside, we're going to have this method over here, this start placement, that receives this ID, and it will basically make this ID to the selected ID, and it's going to start this placement state. So the way this system works is by starting different states. We have a placement state, we have a removing state, we have, as you can see over here, and we want to start placing an item. So we're going to start this placement state, and we're going to provide it with all the different components. So we're providing it with the grid, with the database, with the object placer, and also we provide it with the ID. So now if we click on Control again, hold Control and click on this, it's going to take us into the placement state, and inside we can see that we have this constructor that receives the ID, and using this ID we're going to be able to simply get the actual item that we want to construct. So selected object index, we're going to take our database that we provided, and this database is simply a scriptable object, and we go inside of this database. It's not actually a database, right? It's just a scriptable object with a list of different prefabs. In this way, we can store all of them together. We go and find this index by providing our ID, and it will give us this item. And then we're simply going to start showing the placement preview, because we need to first show the player how will the model look like using the transparent material. So we're using the preview system, show placement, and this will instantiate the prefab just so we can have some kind of preview for the prefab. It's not going to construct it yet, it's just going to create this prefab so we can see how it looks. And of course over here we receive the prefab from the database, because we went into the database, into the objects, and we provided with the ID, and we took the prefab. Now all of this we can find over here inside our database. So this is just a scriptable object, and we can see that for now we only have one object. We have this house. So this is a list of objects, and we only have this house. It has a name, it has an ID of 0, it has a description, it has a size, and it has a prefab. So the prefab is this house over here. Now for now we're going to use this primitive cube, but this way we can create more objects. So if you want to create another building, all you need to do is add another object. You can rename it to be something like power plant, and give it an ID of 1 because you want to increase the ID each time, and give it a description and give it another prefab. In the next episodes, we're going to deal with actually creating a nice model for the houses, so it will look like an actual building, but for now we're going to use these prefabs, so you can drag it over here. So by going into the database, into this list of objects data, and by providing the index, we can simply take the prefab. So this is what we're doing. We're getting this house prefab, this object, and then we're sending it inside of this preview system, and we get it over here, and then we're instantiating it just to have a preview. So we have this prepare preview, and we're simply changing the material so it will be transparent. And after everything is done, after we are actually showing and displaying this item, the player will be able to click on the mouse and place the item. But this will not happen inside of this script because this is just for the preview. This will happen inside the object placer. And we can also see that we have this method, and if we want to see how it's called, we can right click, find all references, and we can see that it is used over here inside the on action. So this is the same placement state, right? And this will happen on action. And this on action, if we go over here, is called by the placement system. So over here, when we place the structure, it's going to get the position of the cell, it will get the actual world to cell position, And we're going to provide this position and call this onAction method. And then it's going to call this method. It's going to check the validity if we can actually build this item and place it in this spot, in this cell. And then it's going to take the data from the cell and it's going to also add the object into this position. So again, I don't want to go deep into it because it's a bit complex and it's going to take a lot of time. And I assume you already lost me somewhere. So it's less important at this point. We just want to make sure that we get the main flow of this script, of this system. And then after we click and place the item, it will remove the preview system. It will simply build the actual item and place it on the ground. It will place this house prefab. So for now, let's just remove this power plant because we don't actually need it. We have this house. We can also add a description. So later, when we have the UI and we hover over it, or we want to get some kind of information about the UI, we can take it from here, from the description. Of course, you can add more things. I also have some fields for requirements and benefits, and this is something that we are going to have later. So for example, this house will require 100 pieces of gold or 100 pieces of wood, right? So we need to have some kind of requirement for this building. We don't want to just build endless houses. So we're going to have the requirements over here. We can also add benefits. For example, if we build a power plant, then we're going to get electricity. So these will be the benefits. So again, there's a few more episodes that we're going to deal with the building system, but by providing you all of these scripts in this episode, we're going to make it much shorter. And now, by simply clicking on this UI, on this button, as I told you before, we're going to start the placement using this ID, and we're going to place the item. So at this point, we can already see how it works. Now, another thing that I want to mention inside the database is that we have the size of the prefab, and the size is 1 by 1. It means that it will basically take one cell. It also depends on the way you want your cells to work. Maybe you want them to be a bit bigger, but usually we're simply going to leave it at 1 on 1. So it's going to be the size of one cell. And then by adding this information over here, we can know that this house will take one cell, because obviously we can also have bigger houses. Maybe we're going to have 2 on 2. Maybe we're going to have 1 on 2, right? Maybe we want a long house instead of a house that will take one cell. So the data will be stored over here, and then when we build the item, it will know how to actually place it. And if we take our prefab, we can also see that we have the parent, right? And we also have the mesh inside, and the mesh is positioned at the tip of the actual parent. So it will actually start over here. You can also see it. We have the parent, and then we have the mesh. So the mesh is positioned at the very corner of the parent, and this way we're going to be able to actually place it, and it will be positioned in the actual place for the cell, and it's not going to look weird, and all the different buildings will be placed one next to each other. We also have this NavMesh obstacle on the actual mesh for the building. Because we're using a NavMesh agent, we don't want him to just go through the houses, right? We want him to go around the houses. So this is a component that we can add, and right now it's going to be disabled. And the reason it's disabled in the beginning is because when we're going to place the object, we don't want to move our units. If this is going to be enabled, it's going to move our units. So first we want to disable it, and only when we place the item we're going to enable it. And we can also see how it works inside the object placer. When we actually place the prefab for the object, we're going to call this method, this constructible was placed, and this will be inside the constructible script. And over here we're going to get our NavMesh obstacle and simply make it enabled. So now let's see that it actually works. Let's start the game. And again, we can just move around like usual, but now we can also click on this button and it's going to show us a preview of the house. You can see that it's transparent, and I can also move it on top of the player. Nothing will happen because the obstacle is not active, but then I can select it and you can also see that it snaps to the different cells. Now, of course, you can create some kind of visual grid to show where we can build it, but for now it will simply allow us to build it anywhere, and then we're going to place it. And now we can see the actual model, and we can also see it in the hierarchy. And if we click on the mesh, we can see that the obstacle is now enabled. So now if we take our unit and we click over here, it will not go through the building, it will go around it, because it knows that this is an obstacle, because this is a NavMesh agent and this is a NavMesh obstacle, and these are the AI components that work for the navigation together. Another thing is that if we try to build another house, it will not allow us to build it on top of this house, right? So we will have to build it somewhere near. And at the moment, we are going to be able to build on top of units, and if we have trees or rocks, we're still going to be able to build on top of them because the system is still not completed. So we're going to continue working on the system in the next episode. So thank you for watching. Please subscribe, and if you have any questions, you can ask me in the comment section, and I'll see you next time.